guys, welcome back to Who, What, Where, a true crime podcast. We're your hosts, Caitlin,
Hannah,
and Abigail.
If you've never listened before, just know this is a very chatty girls' night sleepover type podcast. We will speculate and theorize a lot, so if that's not your jam, we totally understand. But if it is, you can tune in every Monday for a full-length episode, and then come back every Friday for a Freaky Fast Friday episode, where we give you the rundown on a case, sometimes unsolved, always freaky, in 30 minutes or less.
According to all known laws of aviation.
hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today, we're actually doing a real estate themed podcast all about Lizzie Borden's house.
What?
I'm kind of joking, but I thought I had to bring this up because it is just the weirdest coincidence that the week that we planned to do this episode, which is on Lizzie Borden, as you guys probably can tell already, her house, the murder house where she allegedly, some people believe she did, some people believe she didn't, we'll get to that, killed her stepmother and father. Actually brutally murdered them with an axe is a better way to say it. It's not just like she poisoned them or anything. And again, we'll get to that. But it's a lovely home. It looks like a rich old person would live there. And
I mean, that's partially true.
If you want to be haunted, then go ahead and buy it. It's just a cool $2 million.
Oh, like it got listed this week?
Yeah. So let me...
Interesting.
Just going off this again, we're not going to actually talk about the house for the entire episode, but
no, really?
The house was previously like a bed and breakfast kind of thing, and their whole, marketing ploy was come stay at the murder house or whatever. So if you guys want to go, I mean, I don't know why you would, but anyway, so if you guys ever look at pictures of the house, they've kept it very 1800s-esque. So it looks like you literally could go there and be killed by Lizzie Borden today. Nothing's changed. Okay.
I'm sad that you can't go and stay in it anymore because it used to be like an Airbnb, and so you could like...
Well, and we'll talk about later in the episode too, that essentially all of people's like recollections of any kind of haunting or anything or paranormal activity is because they were able to stay at the house as like just like a hotel sort of. So yeah, it is in Fall River, Massachusetts, which I don't think there's anything really to say about it except it's probably beautiful in the fall. I don't know much else about the Northeast. That is the Northeast, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then also, fun fact, this is the last fun fact about the Lizzie Borden's house that you could purchase if you had $2 million burning a hole in your pocket, is that when you buy this house, you get the trademarks and intellectual rights that are associated with it and like the bed and breakfast business. So it has been known as the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast Museum. So you'd be the proud owner of that.
Of a murder house.
Yay. All right. So now let's actually talk about the case, which didn't really bury the lead at all. It's about Lizzie Borden. So Lizzie.
You and your weird expressions. What was the one you just said? Burning a hole in your pocket?
That's normal.
Earlier.
That's a normal expression.
No, it is normal, but you just like say all these weird expressions and it's funny.
What did she say that one time? Bury the lead?
To add flair.
Yeah.
That's what I said. Lizzie Borden was born in Fall River, Massachusetts on July 19th, 1860. So I don't know about you guys, but I had heard a lot about Lizzie Borden before, but I didn't realize that this was like a really, really old case. Like I feel like a lot of cases that we read about are, I mean, at the latest, like the 1960s or 1970s. And this is all the way back in 1860. So keep that in mind too, that there's not like a ton of physical,
primary sources.
like pictures or video or whatever. There are photos though of the crime scene. I'll say that. So, and she was born to her parents, Sarah and Andrew. Um, Andrew, her father, was really wealthy at the time of his death. His property was valued at around $300,000, which is equivalent to about $9 million in 2019. So he was a pretty wealthy man, but he wasn't always wealthy. He grew up quite poor and, I guess you could say like worked to have the American dream and worked really hard and whatever.
A businessman.
Yeah, he was a businessman. And so by the time, he got married and had children, their family was pretty well off. But Andrew remained quite frugal, which I feel like is pretty normal for somebody who had money problems when they were younger.
Oh, totally. Mm-hmm.
And they actually lived in a house with no indoor plumbing, which was really odd at the time for people that were wealthy. A lot of wealthy people lived in houses with indoor plumbing. And a lot of wealthier people in that area actually lived in like a different neighborhood. So even though by like any stretch of the imagination, basically, their family was pretty wealthy, they had no indoor plumbing and they didn't live in the same neighborhood as a lot of other wealthy people did.
Sounds like they were pretty humble.
Yeah, they lived a pretty like, I guess
normal.
You could say, yeah, normal, realistic kind of lifestyle for that time period.
Like they had money, but they like lived like they were middle class.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting choice.
Lizzie Borden's mother, Sarah, died when she was around 40 years old, so she was quite young. I couldn't find a ton about like how she died or if there was any foul play with her death, but I don't think so. I mean, in the 1860s, it wasn't super weird to like die at a younger age. But she died when she was 40 years old, Sarah was. And shortly after her death, Andrew, who it was Lizzie's father, is Lizzie's father, remarried a woman named Abby Durfee Gray. It's a weird name. And then basically this is where things start getting kind of weird. So it wasn't super like shortly after her death. Like it wasn't like the next day he married Abby. It had been a few years, I believe 4 years. So that's not really that weird, I don't think. But a lot of people, including Lizzie and Lizzie's older sister, Emma, believed that Mrs. Borden is what they called her. They didn't even call her mom or Abby. They called her Mrs. Borden. Only married their father for his wealth, which...
not uncommon.
I mean, it's entirely possible, but I feel like you do have to keep in mind too, like these are two children who just lost their mother, so
how would they feel? Yeah.
Right.
I did look up how her biological mother died, and it was uterine congestion and spinal disease, so it was just things that she would have lived from if she was alive today, like basically.
Uterine combustion?
Congestion.
Oh, I was like, that's scary.
It sounds like she had like an infection.
Yeah.
Also, their dad's name is Andrew Jackson Borden, which is kind of funny.
Is it Andrew Jackson the bad guy?
The Trail of Tears president? Yes.
The bad guy.
Well, he had slaves, didn't he?
A lot of presidents.
A lot of them did. Yes,
I was going to say most presidents had
he's
slaves.
Significantly trashy, I guess.
Yeah.
Poor Andrew. No, not poor Andrew.
Her mother, Sarah, died when she was 40 in 1863, which was only a few years after Lizzie's birth. So the whole idea, I mean, let's just cut to the chase. People think that Lizzie was the one that murdered her stepmother and her father. But the whole like notion that, she like hated that someone took her father from her mother, blah, 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 that kind of storyline, I feel like can be kind of cut in its tracks right here, because if she was 3 years old when her mother died, she wouldn't have really known anything or
I
remembered
don't have
anything.
memories from when I was 3. Do you guys?
No.
I have
No.
ones from when I was 4.
That's so specific.
But
Yeah,
I
that is really
remember-
specific.
I remember preschool. I don't remember anything before that though.
Oh.
You guys
Anyway.
remember? Yeah.
So that they really truly believed that Abby had only married their father for his wealth.
I did.
Lizzie and Emma, who
Abby's a gold digger.
Emma was Lizzie's older sister, which we
Yeah,
talked
she's
about.
a gold digger.
Debatable.
So the girls, Lizzie and Emma, they rarely ate dinner with Andrew and Abby. So, I mean, clearly, I think it's pretty clear to say that even though we probably don't think that they hated her because it wasn't their mother, because their mother died when they were still so young, but it is safe to say that regardless, they just didn't like this woman.
Not that I was alive in the 1800s, but it seems strange that like I feel like that's something a family would do together. Is like it was very traditional for people to eat dinner together. Like mom would make dinner, dad comes home from work, they all eat dinner
So,
together.
but I think what you're thinking of is more like 1900s. I think the 1800s was more
that
like
different?
I feel like it was different. It was like we've gone through phases sort of. In like the 1800s, I think of that as, you know, the kids are kind of I don't know how to say it like in a nice way, but they're kind of seen as like it's a necessity to have children. They'll help clean up around the farm and do house chores and whatever. And then
Not everyone lived on
they're
a
like,
farm, Hannah.
I know, but like I feel like they're more separated from the parents. And then in the 1900s was when everyone was like, oh, putting a big emphasis on family and like the big American family and having
Yep.
5 kids and a dog and whatever. And
Which
then
is true. That was early 1900s, and then
and then now we're in the 2000s, which is just a different story. We won't talk about that today. But so
whatever's going on now.
that's sort of like the background of the new family that has become since Abby's marriage into the family.
We need to find another name for her. It's weirding me out.
So we kind of already have addressed this, but there was a little bit of a tension among the family, particularly in relation to Andrew's wealth. So basically what I found about this is that Andrew would gift real estate to a bunch of different members of Abby's family. Like we've already mentioned, he was pretty wealthy, but he would like give them, you know, like a second home, like one of his second homes he would like gift to them. And these were all members of Abby's family. So I think that kind of the notion here is that angered Lizzie and Emma, especially because
He was like giving away their inheritance, basically.
right. So that they were kind of nervous that they weren't going to get their inheritance.
You're putting an N in there that's not there.
Inheritance.
Anyway, so there was a lot of tension within the family, and it mainly had to do with wealth and like is he basically pretending like we aren't part of his family anymore and kind of like cozying up too much with Abby, his new wife's family. Then something really strange happened in the weeks leading up to the murders, okay? The entire household, so it was like Abby, Andrew, Lizzie, Emma, and their maid, whose name was Maggie Sullivan, they all got violently ill, like really, really sick, like so sick that a lot of people thought that they had been poisoned, because Andrew was kind of this unpopular figure in town because he was so wealthy. And so people were like kind of jealous of him, and who knows how many people he stepped on to get to the place that he was, like business wise.
Yeah.
And so basically there's 2 theories. One, they got poisoned, which probably not, because I'll tell you a little bit later why that's probably not the case. But it was also kind of not that common, but sort of common for people to get ill from just like the food they were eating around this time because of like poor refrigeration and, you know, basically things that we never would think would happen today, but they were not that uncommon in the 1800s.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and like people died from eating like bad stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
They're like lucky they just got sick.
like stuff that would like they would just, you know, like meat, for example, that you would leave out instead of like properly refrigerating it and stuff.
Yeah.
And then again, right before the murders happened, John Morse, who was Lizzie's uncle, like her mother's brother. Why can't I say that in a maternal uncle? Is that technically the correct way to say that?
Yeah, maternal uncle.
Maternal uncle,
That's
yeah.
correct.
So actually the day before the murders, John Morse, who was Lizzie and Emma's uncle on their mother's side, so Sarah's brother, visited to discuss business matters with Andrew, which I'll talk about this a little bit later, but basically this is extremely odd. Like this was really weird for him to just show up for pretty much no reason except to discuss business matters, which you'll see why they didn't get to discussing anything. Okay. And that was on August 3rd, 1982. Not 19. August 3rd, 1892, that John showed up. And then we'll talk about the sequence of events, which, speaking of how there's not a ton of evidence in this case, it was weirdly specific how the timeline was laid out. Like on the day of August 4th, 1892. I mean, like down to like 08 or 03. They were different times that were brought up later in the trial. So I just thought that was weird.
Yeah.
So at 8:45 a.m., John Morse, who like we talked about was the uncle, left the house to go buy a pair of oxen. Again, not a thing you would hear in any other time
1982.
period, except for the 1800s. And he was planning, apparently he was going to go buy a pair of oxen for like a niece or like his friend's daughter. I don't know, something like that.
Just casually.
Not super important who he was going to buy the oxen for, but just the point is he was leaving the house at like 8:45 a.m. and he had plans to return home for lunch. Around 9 a.m., Andrew left for his typical morning walk, which apparently this is what he did every morning. He would go on like a couple hour long walk, and then he would come home and take like an afternoon nap. Well, more like a late morning nap. From 9 to 10:30 a.m., sometime within that time frame, Abby went upstairs to tidy up the guest room and make the bed, which the guest room was where John Morse was staying. The reason why this is weird is because it was pretty well known. First of all, they had a maid. And so, you know, typically a maid would do like the cleaning and tidying up. And then also, even for the things that the maid didn't do, who I already said, but her name's Maggie. So aside from the fact that they had a maid, it was also kind of weird because Lizzie and Emma, that was one of their chores, was to like tidy up the guest room if they ever had guests over, which they did occasionally.
Well, and the thing is like most of the evidence is being told by Lizzie and Maggie, right? Like during the trial.
You're kind of alluding to one of the theories that we'll talk about later, I think, maybe. But so Abby, sometime around this time, Abby went upstairs to tidy the guest room. And then this was when she was brutally murdered. And based on all the forensics and like everything, and essentially the way the hatchet marks were in her head, which is disgusting but true,
Yikes.
it was found that she had been facing her attacker when she was murdered. So first of all, that's freaky because that means that there's nobody that knows who did this except for Abby and Andrew, you know, like those are the people that know for sure because they were probably looking at their attacker. Well, not Andrew, which we'll get to that. So she was hit a ton of times in the head, like a ton as in 17 plus times hit in the head with a hatchet.
A little
And
excessive.
one of the first hits, she was struck on the side of her head, like right above her ear, which caused her to then fall face down on the floor, which is where she then took 17 more direct hits to the back of her head with like a hatchet, like an axe. So this sentence or few sentences that I just said right here basically is all you need to know that this was not like just a random intruder, in my opinion. Like this was a crime of passion, but 17, like that's just excessive. So
Yeah, at that point they're already like on the ground.
like bleeding out dead.
Yeah, you had to like bend over them and start. Oh, horrible.
Anyway, so one of the photos that it's not that gory because they've like covered up her head where all the blood is and everything. But she's laying face down on the floor, like just like this. Like it's really creepy, like with her arms down at her side, laying down, you know, like
she just fell.
Like she just fell. And then around 10:30 a.m. is when Andrew returned to the house from his walk, like we said. And this is a weird little note. His key failed to open the door. It didn't unlock the door, which chances are they didn't get the locks changed in like 2 hours. But I mean, that's just kind of odd. Like maybe someone jammed the door specifically because of what had been happening inside. And then that's when Maggie, who was the maid, came to open the door for him after he had begun knocking. And obviously she like ran to the door and opened it. And she's like, oh, you know, apparently she like uttered an expletive. This is when Maggie eventually testified was around the time that she heard Lizzie laughing at the top of the stairs. And in my notes, I literally have a question mark, exclamation point, WTF. Girl, Lizzie, that is the most incriminating thing you can do. And so now this is important to mention, not just because this is freaking weird if she actually was laughing, but also because if she was upstairs at all, she would have seen Abby's dead body, apparently. That's what they say about the way the house is set up. And then I'll talk about in a little bit too, like some of the testification, no, the testimonies where people, I'll talk about that later, but basically it's more proof that if she was upstairs, she would have known what happened to Abby. Lizzie obviously later denied that she was laughing at the top of the stairs because why would you be? Anyway.
Well, why would she be like, oh yeah, it was really funny.
Me.
My dad. Oh yeah. Wait, how old is Lizzie at the time?
Well, this is in 1892 and she was born in 1860, so
32 years.
Just yeah, she lived in the house.
That's quite strange.
But she was like an adult, so
no.
Did you know her middle name is Andrew?
Yeah, isn't that odd? Emma, I mean, I did find in my research that Emma and Lizzie were known as spinsters, which is like a term apparently for women who like grow old past the age of like marriage, which obviously nowadays it doesn't matter, but back in the day.
Yeah, so pretty much any woman that like wasn't married by like 25, I think, was pretty much a spinster.
Yeah.
Because those are like your prime childbearing years, you know? And you know, a patriarchal society doesn't want you to miss out on your prime childbearing years.
That would be horrible. And Lizzie,
sad day.
So Lizzie, after she denied that she was laughing at the top of the stairs, obviously she would have done that. Why would she like admit to that unless she was admitting guilt? Anyway, she also said like during this testimony that a messenger had come for Abby to basically summon her to visit a sick friend. which is also weird. Like, I mean, I guess it's the 1800s, so it's probably a
So
lot
is the
different.
family no longer violently ill?
No, they're like still ill.
Yeah, so I'll talk about that actually in just a second. One member in particular was still pretty ill. But yeah, they were still ill. Like, it wasn't like it had gone away all of a sudden. But they wanted Abby to come visit a sick friend because maybe she was going to die or something. I don't know. Allegedly, that's what Lizzie said. And then this is when Lizzie says that she helped her father take off his boots that he had been like walking around in before he laid down on the sofa for his like late morning nap. So this is false. This is like 100% a lie. Because the crime scene photos, again, there's like 2 photos that I could find, like actual pictures. He's wearing his boots. So he's not wearing the slippers that Lizzie says that she helped him take off his boots and put on his slippers. Okay. Just keep that in mind. That's
How
a little
dumb of her.
Yeah, and we'll talk about later the theories too. And there's one theory that can kind of work its way in there. But anyway. And then she then told Maggie that there was a department store sale and that she should go to it. Maggie felt sick, obviously, because apparently it was super, super hot that day, like one of the hottest days on record for the year. And they were all like,
yeah, that sounds about right.
And they were all like violently ill. So she felt unwell. So she went upstairs, or not specifically upstairs, just cut that part out, because I don't want people to think that she went upstairs, because I don't think she did. She went to her bedroom to take a nap instead of going to the department store sale. But good job, Lizzie, for letting Maggie know that there was a good deal about to get on. I just
Girls gotta help girls.
It's like Lizzie was like looking at her hand, like she like wrote notes on her hand. She's like, "What can I tell Maggie to get her out of here so I can kill my dad?" She's like, "Oh yeah, department store sale."
Do we
Go
know
get
if
yourself
it was a
some-
department
It
store
also,
sale?
I mean, it also feels like so, like for some reason that makes me think of like Gossip Girl or something. Like, oh, there's a department store sale, let's go. I don't know, it's just weird.
It's like very like simple.
Yeah,
Very like simple thing.
What are
to
we
try
gonna
to
do on a Tuesday afternoon? Oh, let's go to a department store. Anyway,
They're not
Why
British,
did-
Hannah.
Why do they have British accents? They're in Massachusetts.
that was me. I put that on. And then shortly after this, only like a little bit over a half an hour later, Maggie heard Lizzie calling from downstairs.
So
And-
nobody knows that Abby's laying in the upstairs bedroom dead.
Okay, now this is where it gets weird.
Theoretically. Yeah.
Yes, because Maggie at this point says that she's on the 3rd floor of the house, which you guys know how houses work with stairs. You have to walk up to the 2nd floor to get to the 3rd floor. Okay? So that's bizarre because
So that's where her room is?
Abby lay dead on the 2nd floor at this point. Like, we basically know a few things for sure, and that's Abby is dead at this point on the 2nd floor, and Maggie is on the 3rd floor hearing Lizzie call from the 1st floor. Okay? Weird. And Lizzie says something along the lines, it was in quotes, but I'm not 100% sure if this is like actually what she said. She said, "Maggie, come quick. Father's dead. Someone came in and killed him." Wouldn't you like to believe so?
And that's all she said.
That's all she said. So
Why
then,
didn't he kill you, lady?
So then obviously Maggie came downstairs. So
As one does.
I guess Lizzie's kind of idea was that, oh, maybe it isn't that weird to believe that someone just came in and murdered my father because
And then left her?
because he was like a wealthy businessman.
Yeah.
So maybe people were out to get him. I don't know.
I feel like, yeah, that's weird. I watch enough true crime to think that they would like be like, "I'm gonna kill your daughter in front of you." Like, it's not very realistic that they would have like she would have just been like, "Ah, my father," and then like they just left.
Yeah, so
they would have seen them. She would have seen them.
Well, maybe we'll get to that in a minute. That's kind of one
gosh.
of the theories. So Andrew was at this point laying dead on the couch that he had went to take a
I'm
nap
alive,
on.
but I'm dead.
Also murdered with an axe, correct?
Yes, so he had only been hit 11 times with a hatchet. So
Plus anger.
Ooh, she was tired.
yeah, and
Taking a nap.
and it's at this point that apparently Maggie said that the wounds were so fresh that he was like still bleeding from the wounds where he had been hit with a hatchet.
Yikes.
Like it had just happened. Then this is kind of a weird thing. Again, a total 1800s thing that wouldn't happen now. Apparently, the family doctor, Dr. Bowen, who lived across the street, what? Came over and was like, oh yeah, both of these victims are dead. Which to this I said, duh. Like, of course they're dead. Come on, Dr. Bowen. Like, I could be Dr. Bowen at this rate. And he estimated that Andrew's time of death was somewhere around 11 a.m. That's pretty much it for sort of like the facts of the case and the actual like day of the case. Not of the case, but of the murders. So Andrew dead, 11 hits to his body. Abby dead.
With an axe.
With a hatchet.
Hatchet.
Abby dead with 17 plus hits. Okay. Lizzie's, I mean, to say the least, Lizzie's answers to things were kind of weird. And especially at the beginning, a lot of her answers were pretty contradictory to each other. Like, she would answer one question and then answer another one that would totally contradict that. She would also not answer a lot of questions because I don't know why exactly, but she wouldn't answer a lot of questions, and that kind of confused people because a lot of the questions she didn't ask or answer were questions that would have probably helped her if she would have just answered them.
Yeah, like exonerated her.
Yeah. Which kind of points to maybe she is just guilty. I don't know. And Maggie and a neighbor, this is kind of one of the weird points that I was talking about earlier, that it was weird and would confirm that if Lizzie was upstairs at all, she would have seen Abby dead. Maggie and a neighbor who was Mrs. Churchill, I don't know where she lived, which house, but apparently they saw Abby lying down, face down on the floor in the guest room. So weird. Like, there's, I mean, like, who just lays down, like face down on the ground ever?
Maybe she was just tired.
She's just taking a nap.
I'm gonna take a nap right here.
He has
She's
his mid-morning nap on the couch, and she just lays on the floor.
She just passes out on the floor upstairs. And then a lot of people had an issue with how calm Lizzie seemed about the whole thing. She seemed like she was too poised to have just found out that her father was murdered with a hatchet, and so was her stepmother, like brutally murdered. So, I mean, yeah, whatever, which is probably true, but at the same time, in like the 1800s, it was like women, more so than today, women were really taught to be like very poised and proper and well-mannered and everything. So maybe she was just being polite to like the police officers and all these different people that were asking her questions and stuff. The police officers, like the investigation group, they did search her room for evidence because obviously she was one of like the main suspects in the whole thing from the very beginning. But they later admitted during like the actual trial that it wasn't really a proper search because Borden said she wasn't feeling well. Okay, number one, duh, because they were sick, but also two, duh, she just saw her father like like hatched up. I don't know.
Hatched up.
Hatched up.
Hacked. You mean hacked?
She saw her father hacked. And you know what I just thought is kind of weird, but like they never talk about how when they found him dead, like did they not like immediately say, "Oh my God, where's Abby? Like, is she also dead?" I don't know. They never talked about that. So,
well, it seems like it's been a pretty big span of time now that they weren't like, oh, where's Abby? Is she just laying on the floor upstairs taking a nap? Like,
it had been probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours, I think, from the time that Abby was killed to when Andrew was killed and found dead. So
So I don't know that I'm. Wait. First of all, where's Emma? So Emma Borden did live in this home, but she claimed to not have been there at the time. But people, like, there are conflicting reports about this. Because her and Lizzie had gone on, like, a little vacation, and they were in New Bedford for, like, up until a week before this happened, I believe. And so I think Emma was, like, at somebody's house is what she, like, claimed. But there was conflicting evidence of that, so.
during the like initial searches of the house, the police found 2 hatchets, 2 axes, and a hatchet head with a broken handle in the basement of the house. So, I mean, like, just that's a little
interesting
bit.
to ditch your weapon in the home.
Yeah, good thing
Were
you
they
mentioned that.
clean?
So, the broken one, like, and I think this is what they're saying when they say hatchet head with a broken handle, is that all that was left of it was like the axe part, not the handle. Like the handle
Yeah.
had been broken off. And the idea here is that, okay, the handle would have had blood on it. It's presumably like leather or wood. So you can't really get blood off of that as easy as you could like wipe it off of like
Because it's
steel,
porous.
like that's on the hatchet. Like the actual blade of the hatchet you could get off, you could clean off pretty easily. So yeah, there wasn't anything, as far as I know, wasn't anything like super obviously incriminating, like a bunch of blood on it or anything. But it was kind of weird that there was a hatchet with a broken handle, like just laying
and
down
people
there.
dead from hatchet hits.
Yeah. And then they also said that it was kind of odd because it looked as though like dust and like ash and stuff had been rubbed on the hatchet with the broken handle, basically to make it look like it had been down there the whole time, like it had always been just sitting there in the corner collecting dust. So that's kind of odd. Like that's pretty incriminating if you ask me. So and then like I said earlier, it was a theory that they were so ill because they had been poisoned possibly, but all of the 2 victims, Andrew and Abby's bodies were tested for poison and there was none found in their system. So you can pretty much rule out that they were poisoned, which is okay because they didn't need to be poisoned to get killed. They just were murdered with a hatchet. And then this is kind of odd as well. Apparently Lizzie had previously inquired at the local drugstore about purchasing hydrocyanic acid in a diluted form.
Cyanide?
Yeah. She said that it was to clean
Cyanide?
hydrocyanic acid.
Probably cyanide.
Yeah. She said it was to
Interesting.
clean her furs, like her fur coat or whatever.
Is that
which
what you clean furs with?
apparently no. So pretty much everybody, like, that came up in trial obviously, and basically the expert witness or whatever said that that's incorrect, like that's not what you would use to clean fur. So she tried but not hard enough, I guess. I don't know. A friend whose name was Alice Russell, who was a friend of Lizzie and Emma's, stayed over the night following the murders, which not that weird. Like maybe they felt really unsafe if they really truly believed that someone had come in and like murdered.
I think it's kind
her.
of weird that they slept in the house.
Maybe a little bit. This is where it gets a little bit weirder. The police, they had stationed police around the house because at this point Lizzie was still, as far as I know, going off of the idea that someone had like an intruder had entered the house and killed her father. So there was a bunch of police around the house, like to kind of try to keep them safe. And they said, they testified that at like in the middle of the night, they saw Russell, so Alice, their friend, and Lizzie enter the cellar with a kerosene lamp and a slop pail, so like a bucket. And then they didn't really see much else, but it appeared that Lizzie was bent over the sink. So, I mean, you could think a lot of different things with that, but kind of the most obvious to me is like she's cleaning something, right? They went down there to clean off some sort of evidence, maybe. Eventually, Lizzie was told that she was a suspect in the murders, even though honestly it was pretty obvious that she was like the main suspect from the very beginning. And the next morning, Alice Russell, the friend, said that she saw Lizzie tearing up a dress, and Lizzie was like, "Oh, I'm going to put it in the fire. It was covered in paint. It was ruined anyway." Pardon me, Lizzie? Like, excuse me, ma'am? That's pretty much all I need to know. Like, which is a little odd. Like, it's probably not covered in paint. Obviously everyone was like, yeah, she was getting rid of evidence. She was tearing up the dress that she had worn the day of the murders. Because this was
so like
the day after she found out that she was officially being like the main suspect in the murders.
This whole dress situation, that is, like you said, like that's enough evidence. Like that
So
is
Emma testified in her trial, and she said that the reason that she believed Lizzie was tearing up this dress is because even though it was like brand new, she had just gotten it earlier that year, she had got paint on it like earlier in the summer.
Yeah,
and so
that's
there
what I
was
just
paint
said.
on it.
There was probably,
Yeah.
and so
So Emma testified to that in trial. Like she said that she even asked Lizzie at one point, "Oh, why do you still have that dress?"
So
But
guess,
I saw that she was burning it. Did you say she was burning it or
yeah,
just tearing?
she was tearing it up to put in the fire, so she was gonna burn it. I mean, yeah, I guess I could see that I mean, it's possible that it actually did have paint on it, but it's also possible that
Had blood on it.
Or why that day? Why that day did Lizzie choose, "Oh, I'm gonna go tear up a dress," knowing, unless she was like not all there, I'm assuming she would know that would be pretty weird to like investigators and stuff. And then at the inquest, which I think it was basically like an old, like that was what they used to do before the actual trial to kind of figure out if there needed to be a trial. So I think sort of like a pre-trial hearing almost.
Pretty much.
Basically,
sounds about right.
It's basically just it's usually only used in cases where there's a death involved to essentially determine the cause of the person's death. So not necessarily go into like who killed them or like
but
why,
is it homicide or
but was it a murder? Yeah. She, at this time, like right before the inquest began, she had been prescribed morphine to help calm her nerves. And a lot of people believe that it's likely that this affected her testimony. So
it's really strange.
Lizzie's.
Yeah.
Morphine is quite the drug for nervousness. I mean, it is the 1800s.
Yeah, and like, I mean, the 1800s was when people were like, "Oh, women are just crazy. Like, we can't help them. They're just nuts."
That's true.
Which like, okay,
load her
like,
up with
fair,
morphine.
but like, give me more information. Anyway, so she had been prescribed morphine, which is odd, and then her testimony was bizarre. Kind of like I was saying earlier, she gave a lot of unusual answers and refused to answer some questions, even ones that seemed like they would be beneficial to her. Contradicted herself a lot and was just overall gave a really weird kind of persona throughout the inquest. And then right before the actual trial began, so after the inquest was over and done with, there was another axe murder in Fall River, which weird, right? Like that's totally odd. Um, they were very similar natured murders, like both like with a hatchet, very brutal. The woman who got murdered was like murdered in her kitchen, like midday, like bizarre. Um, and then of course a lot of like at because of the timing of it, a lot of people were like, oh my god, it has to be the same person, right? Maybe it's true that Lizzie didn't do it and it was some random person, but it later Jose Correa de Mello was convicted of the murder, and he was found to, it was unlikely basically that he was in Fall City at the time of the Borden murders. So that was kind of like a weird fact that there was an axe murder in Fall River. I mean, assuming that there wasn't a ton normally, kind of weird that there was one like right before the trial began. But again,
Yeah.
it was pretty much like it was a weird coincidence, but didn't have anything to do with the Borden murders. And then I'll kind of just discuss like a few main points of the trial, and then we'll jump into the theories because going through like a full trial is kind of boring. So one of the big points of the trial that was like highly discussed was the hatchet that was found in the basement. That was like kind of what we were saying earlier a couple minutes ago. That was for me, cold done. There we go. It was Lizzie, or it was someone who lived in the house, right? That went and ditched the hatchet in the basement. And then another big point of the trial was the dress that was being ripped up to be burned by Lizzie. Obviously, this is weird. Like, mainly, we talked about this already, but mainly because of the timing. Like, if that dress really had been ruined by paint, couldn't she have like waited to tear it up? Like, I don't know. Did she need to do it the day after she found out she was a suspect in the murders? And then another big point was whether or not Lizzie was actually in the home at the point of her father's death. So apparently she had went out to the barn, which was like on the property.
Who?
Around Lizzie.
Oh, okay.
Around 11 a.m. for 20 to 30 minutes. So that would be basically right at the time that Andrew would have been murdered. So that kind of goes with maybe she didn't do it. Maybe it was true that she walked back in the house at 11:10 a.m. or whatever it was and saw her father like had just gotten murdered basically. But then a few witnesses, like in the area, neighbors, whatnot, testified that they had seen her leave the barn at around 11:03 a.m. First of all, again, there's the weirdly specific times. I don't know how these people had that good of time. I don't know, like timekeeping, but that would mean that it's probable that she was actually in the house when her father was murdered around 11:10 a.m. So that's kind of like two sides of like the same story. And it's like, do you believe that she was in the barn for a full 20 to 30 minutes? Or do you believe witnesses saying she went to the barn at 11 a.m., but then they saw her coming back into the house or leaving the barn, not necessarily going back into the house at 11:03 a.m. But if she had left the barn, why wouldn't she have gone back to the house kind of situation? Then another big point, like major like milestone in the trial, was the skulls of Abby and Andrew had been kept and admitted as evidence for the trial, and they showed them during the trial, and then apparently Lizzie, when she saw them, fainted. So that's kind of weird. If she really could have killed these two people with like brutal hatchet, like just slaying basically them, it would be odd to me that she would faint at the sight of seeing them like in the trial as evidence.
Did she like, do you think she like genuinely fainted, or like,
I mean, I don't know. I didn't really go super in depth into that. So I guess that's kind of an interesting point to make, because you could think, okay, maybe she like just pretended to faint, like she was so appalled that they showed them to her.
no.
That's kind of like one idea. And then the other point that was brought up in the trial a lot was that the day before the murders, Borden had purchased Prussic acid, which again was apparently for cleaning another fancy coat she had. This one was made out of sealskin. Lizzie, first of all, like, you possibly murdered your parents and now you have fur coats and sealskin coats. I don't like you at all. Anyway, so she had a weird relationship with the local pharmacy. I guess that's all I'll say. She inquired about the hydrocyanic acid, and then the day before she possibly murdered 2 people, she purchased prussic acid. So, I mean, like, that, it was found that they weren't poisoned, but maybe she had a different plan. Maybe she was planning to poison them, but then things just worked out better for her to just murder them with a hatchet. I don't know. Eventually she was acquitted. So, like, the jurors found her not guilty. I know. After presenting everything to you, you're probably like, how did they find her not guilty? So
I think there just wasn't any genuine evidence. Like, that was the
There's
thing.
not. It's
there
all
isn't a ton of
suspicion.
evidence. This case is kind of held up above, like, like, as, like, OJ Simpson's cases, where it's like, duh, he did it, but here's it just is like kind of.
Well, also, like, she probably had pretty good lawyers. And that was a big thing in OJ Simpson's case, is he had like a whole team of lawyers because he could afford to pay them. And, like, I don't know, that's my theory, is that, like,
So
but being rich can get you away with a lot of things.
I've also seen that the jury was all men, like, as was custom at the time. And I think they genuinely just didn't believe that a woman, like, could do that.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
she, like, beautiful? That's my other question.
No, I think she's pretty average looking.
Yeah, she was average, but
Her sister was prettier, but they were like Hannah said, spinsters. Like, they were part of, like, a church. They were really, like, churchy. They were in the women's my gosh, what is it called? The people that were behind Prohibition, temperance, the Women's Temperance Union, the Christian Temperance Union, that was behind Prohibition later. Like, they were part of that. Like, they were very religious women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, didn't seem like they took. Also, they were, like, buying fancy clothes. Like, who are you buying the fancy clothes for?
They found her not guilty was kind of what Caitlin mentioned, that she was a woman. How was a woman gonna, like, murder her father?
Yeah,
and
like,
his
they
wife?
probably couldn't even, like, imagine that this woman,
yeah.
like, brutally murdered 2 people. Like, especially her parents, technically.
Yeah. And also the other, thought is there's no evidence, really. The only evidence that they had was sort of evidence that they had was the hatchet that was found in the basement. But even then, it's not like DNA testing nowadays where they could, scrub it for fingerprints or whatever. If it didn't have the person's blood on it, it probably wasn't going to be able to be used as, like, cold hard evidence. We'll quickly discuss kind of some of the theories. So the first theory, which is, like, kind of one of the most widely, if you believe that these are all theories that if you actually believe that Lizzie was the one that murdered them, or basically that there wasn't, like, an outside intruder that came into the house and killed Abby and Andrew. One of the theories is that Lizzie was in, like, a psychotic state at the time of the murders, so she truthfully doesn't remember or know exactly what happened, which Abby kind of brought this up too, that, like, maybe she, like, literally wasn't in her right mind when it happened. And that would also kind of make a little bit more sense why she was prescribed morphine right after, to kind of, like, maybe she had a medical history that just wasn't brought up. But
well, they just, like, anytime a woman had any, like, mental health issue, they were just like, oh, she's hysterical.
Well, and I was just about to say that too, like it was women's health issues. I mean, health issues in general, but specifically for women, were really, like, pushed off at this time, especially by all male doctors, right? So it's possible that maybe she had, like kind of a history of psychosis or some sort of disorder that would have been able to cause her. Like some people like speculated maybe like some sort of multiple personality kind of disorder. Something that would be possible basically for her to brutally murder somebody and then essentially have no idea that she had done it. Kind of like in a blackout situation, like she blacked out and did it and then didn't realize. And that would also explain, kind of like conflicting evidence that she had given, like statements and then completely contradicted herself and back and forth because maybe she just really didn't remember. There was also a little bit, one theory that was like kind of widely like theorized was that there was physical and or sexual abuse from her father. That theory is a little bit interesting because if you think about, the time period that all this stuff was going on, it was really taboo to talk about incest or possible sexual abuse within the family. Like that just wasn't talked about. Especially not like in the 1800s. So it's not talked about a ton today, but
especially like a family who had a patriarch who was like
right,
incredibly influential and rich. But also, if somebody found out about that, they would have incentive to tell somebody about it because people didn't like him, is my understanding.
Yeah.
So
for some reason,
like,
which to me that means that he probably just stepped on people on his way to the top kind of thing.
well, and he was cheap. He like was really like stingy with a lot of stuff and like
Yeah.
would find any way to save $1 basically.
Yeah.
You know, he had all this money.
Yeah. I'll save my favorite theory for last. So we'll talk about the next one on my line, which is that John Morse, who was the Lizzie and Emma's uncle on their mother's side, was the one who killed them.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So and the main reasoning behind this theory is that it was really odd that he happened to visit them, the night before the murders, considering he rarely visited or even spoke to the family.
Well, not only did he visit, he was invited to visit.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird. So a lot of people believe that he was there to discuss like, why are you giving away your real estate to Abby's family, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of speculated that there was a incident the night that he got there, not an incident necessarily, but a argument that happened between John and Andrew about kind of the whole real estate gifting thing. So, like that theory is not my favorite nor one that I really like to subscribe to because I just don't like, it was such a brutal murder with like so much passion that I just feel like, his brother-in-law murdering him and his new wife was just a little far-fetched, in my opinion. Unless maybe John knew something that we don't know, like maybe Andrew had been cheating on Sarah with Abby, and so that caused some issues, but I don't know. But like I said, Abby and Andrew didn't marry until like a couple years after Sarah had died. So and then another theory is that Maggie, this one is like so stupid, I think, because I mean, like, I guess, but not really. Maggie, the theory is that Maggie killed them both, brutally murdered them both with a hatchet, okay? Keep that in mind. For having to clean the windows on an extremely hot day.
Well,
isn't that your job? Like, I mean, not to be one of those people, but like, really, would she have brutally murdered her like employers because they made her clean the windows?
I don't think so.
No. And I guess people were just like, okay, who else was at the house that could have possibly done it?
Yeah, I guess that's understandable, but I mean,
Yeah. Unlikely,
everybody
basically.
sounds a little suspicious.
Well, and I was just gonna say too that kind of what makes John Morse seem a little bit more suspicious is that he said that he was gonna be back for lunchtime, and the murder of Andrew. Oh, I guess actually that would defeat the purpose of the murder of Abby. Because I was like, never mind. And then my favorite theory, which I saved for last, which is kind of the most far out, weird, but also like could possibly be the case. And there are different versions of this theory. Caitlin kind of already mentioned one, but basically the theory is that Lizzie and Maggie, who was the maid, were lesbian lovers.
Yes, this is the one. This is the one.
And
Didn't
essentially
they make a movie about that?
I think
yes,
so.
they did.
The movie
I was
with
looking at pictures.
Christina Ricci,
Yeah.
however you say her last name, she plays Lizzie in it, I'm pretty sure.
I
if I remember
googled
correctly.
like Lizzie Borden,
Mhm.
and some of the photos were like from the movie, and I was like, why are these ladies making out? But
So
Nope,
and-
I'm by it. I buy
and
it.
this-
That's why
this
she's
is an-
unmarried at 32 or whatever.
Okay, so that's one of the big points, obviously, is that she was unmarried. And it apparently was not like throughout the rest of her life too. She was rumored to be a lesbian. And apparently at some point after this whole situation took place, Emma and Lizzie actually got in a really big argument about Lizzie's relationship with the woman. I mean, obviously, it probably seemed like a friendship, but apparently Emma was like, no, this is something more. And I mean, in like 1892, like people are like, lesbians are the devil, you know? So it
Especially
was
women that were part of the Women's Christian Temperance
it
Union,
was
you
a
know?
much different time. But so that's kind of interesting too.
well,
is that,
I'm not surprised at all that people didn't like lesbians back in the Dizzy day.
And so essentially the theory is that they were lesbian lovers. And I mean, there's a few different like branches of the theory. One branch is that they were doing something together that lesbians would do together, whatever you want to take that with your imagination. And Abby and Andrew and or one or the other saw them and told one or the other. And then it was like this super like big riff kind of in the family, and they had like fought about it and whatnot, and they were like, you know, really upset about it. And then like the other branch of the theory is just that like they were lesbian lovers and they hated that Andrew was kind of giving away like their real estate, their rights as his child, as Lizzie as his child. And so they were like, let's just take him out. And so they were in on the whole thing together. That's the theory. And
Well,
then
and it worked. Like, they
Yeah.
got the fortune.
Yeah.
So.
I guess that's important to note too. They so basically if Abby would have like not been killed, then all of Andrew's fortune would have gone to Abby first, and then she probably
Yeah.
wouldn't have given him to Lizzie and Emma. But because they were both killed like on the same day at the same time, pretty much.
Doesn't sound like they particularly liked Abby either, so I'm
No,
sure
so
they
didn't
weren't
really
like,
care. It was just collateral damage kind of.
yeah.
And then kind of the like cherry on top of this theory is that on Maggie's deathbed a while later, whenever she died, which was a while later in Butte Falls, Montana, by the way, she allegedly confessed to her sister that she had lied in the testimony she had given in the trial in order to protect Lizzie. So, girl, so I don't know. That's kind of like that theory
Crazy.
is pretty far out, but then like the more you think about it, it's like, oh. And this theory is the one that, I mean, there's been books written on this theory. There's been movies based off of this kind of like lesbian lover thing. So, I mean, it's probably the easiest to sensationalize, which is probably why, but
Yeah, definitely. I have a feeling, I don't know if I believe in all of that they were in a relationship, even though, I mean, it does seem likely because she was really old and single.
Yeah. It didn't necessarily seem like she had any like hopes to marry.
But I know her and Emma were really close, so I think in addition to Maggie, Emma probably knew that
So I
Lizzie was
guess
planning on killing them.
that's another branch of the theory, is that all three of them were involved. Like,
Because Emma was like more or less like a mother figure because she was like 9 years older, so
Right, so she's quite a bit
they
older.
had a really close relationship. Like actually to so because Lizzie was suspected of being the murderer, the fortune went to Emma, and she used a ton of it to like get Lizzie really good lawyers essentially, and to like her fight for her innocence, I guess.
And Lizzie, when she died, she gave almost like, or when like she was about to die, she wrote like off a lot of her, like in her will, she gave a lot of different people a bunch of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money. Because I think when she died, she was worth like $4.9 million in today's money.
Wow.
Yeah.
So she was worth a lot, and she gave it all away. She gave a little bit to like a charity too, one or two charities. So I don't know if that really persuades you one way or the other to say she was a good person or not, or if she did she murdered them or not. Yeah. And then I just want to put like one little note in before we kind of close it off too, that obviously there are a lot of, whether or not you believe this, that's up to you, but there's a lot of like rumors that there is strong paranormal activity in the home now. And apparently some people who have stayed there say that there's a lot of activity, kind of like weird feelings that you get in there, but none of the activity makes any contact. So it doesn't seem like, it's interesting. I mean, if you believe in that kind of stuff, it's interesting because you would think that if the ghosts of Andrew and Abby were still there, they would be like super angry and like want to hurt anyone that came in there. But it doesn't seem like that's the case if you believe in that kind of thing, which I think there's a few books actually on kind of the haunting side of it. So you could read into that too, if that's something that interests you guys. But so that's it for Lizzie Borden. Kind of a weird case. I mean, definitely a weird case, especially because of like how long ago it happened. And I'm glad I could find as much like information as I could on it because it did happen so long ago. So don't forget, if you guys are listening to this on YouTube, to leave us some comments down below in the comment section. And then also head over to our Instagram and comment on our Instagram post. We post kind of a series of pictures every time we have a new episode go up, and so you guys can comment on that and kind of tell us what you think, or if you have any like questions or like additional information to add to the case. And then we also have a Facebook at Who Would Wear Podcast, and that's what our Instagram is, and our YouTube as well. And you can also leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts. Thanks, everybody.